Ever had someone try to tell you how to grill? Well, Karen thinks she knows better, but what happens when she challenges a BBQ master? Watch till the end to see who really knows their way around the grill. And trust me, it's not who you think. Hit that like button and subscribe for more BBQ Showdowns. The smoke curled upward in slow, hypnotic swirls as the scent of oak and mesquite wrapped around the backyard like a warm blanket. My hands moved on instinct, lifting the smoker lid just enough to let the heat breathe, while my guests gathered in lawn chairs watching with wide eyes and watering mouths. The brisket had been in for 13 hours, its bark dark and glistening juices, whispering promises of perfection. My son leaned over the table, snapping a photo for his feed. Even my neighbor Rob, who claimed nothing could beat Kansas City. Ribs was now quiet, chewing on a rib tip I tossed him during prep. Then came the sound that changed the air completely. The scraping slap of rubber flip-flops against concrete. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. The scent of artificial lemon perfume arrived first. Then the voice, high sharp and already shaped like criticism. That smoke is definitely violating some kind of code. Kerren. She stood at the edge of her lawn. Arms crossed, a reusable water bottle clutched in one hand, her sunglasses glinting like interrogation lights. Her dog, some yappy creature in a sweater, barked twice, then immediately peed on her tulips. I kept my tone even. "Afternoon, Kerren, just finishing up a brisket for the family." She stepped closer, wrinkling her nose. "That's brisket. It looks completely overdone. You shouldn't lift the lid so much, it ruins the bark." Rob choked quietly on a laugh. I didn't bite. "Appreciate the tip, but I've got it under control." Kerren wasn't done. "You should be careful about meat temps, too. You know, bacteria loves that window between 40 and 140 degrees. Your feeding kids aren't. You." I set the lid back down slowly, watching the thermometer settle. "Every slice is monitored, Kerren. But thanks for your concern." She waved her hand dismissively. "My brother is a professional chef. He was trained in Tuscany. He says you should never smoke meat more than 6 hours max. You're just drying it out." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd heard variations of this speech before. Kerren had lived next door for 3 weeks and already managed to comment on my lawn, my fence line, my garbage can placement, and now my barbecue. She turned to the others, addressing them like a substitute teacher. "I just hope no one gets sick from undercooked meat. These backyard setups aren't exactly sanitary, you know?" My daughter shifted in her chair, clutching her plate like it might be taken away. The mood deflated like a slow leak in a party balloon. I took a breath. I sanitize everything before and after. Kerren, food safety's kind of my thing. I've been doing this for 15 years. That was the moment she smiled. Not a warm smile. A condescending tilt of the lips, like I'd just proven her point. "Well, experience doesn't mean expertise, just saying." Then she turned and walked away, but not before adding, "If anyone gets diarrhea later, you know who to blame." The laughter was hesitant. Thin guests murmured behind me, but it wasn't the same. My son set down his phone. His shoulders hunched slightly. Rob muttered something under his breath that included the word psycho. The moment was ruined. The flavors, the fire, the shared joy, all soured by a single voice. I clenched my jaw, turning my focus back to the smoker. "Let it go," I told myself. "It's not worth it." But as I stared at the meat I'd prepped for 2 days, as I heard her dog barking again on the other side of the fence. Something changed. It wasn't just irritation anymore. It was personal. Not because she didn't like my food, because she'd embarrassed me in front of my family. She'd made my daughter doubt my safety. She'd turned a gathering into a cautionary tale. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and only smoke hung heavy in the air, I found myself staring at the fence line, thinking Kerren had pushed the wrong man. I'd dealt with critics before I'd seen judges tear apart ribs for the wrong glaze or brisket for folding instead of bending. But Kerren wasn't a judge. She was an amateur. An uninvited voice in a world she didn't understand. I scraped down the grates, slowly, methodically, each stroke of the brush a kind of promise. She wanted to correct my technique. She wanted to humiliate me, but she didn't know what I was capable of. The next time she opened her mouth, she'd wish she hadn't. And the entire neighborhood would be watching, because some lessons are best served slow-smoked and public. The warning came in a plain white envelope slipped under my door sometime between Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. It had the cold, formal language of bureaucracy and the familiar logo of the HOA stamped in blue ink, notice of violation. Improper. Outdoor equipment. Smoke disturbance. Food safety concerns. My fingers tightened around the paper as I read it again, then again. Each sentence felt like a slap from someone hiding behind red tape. I already knew who had sent the complaint. No signature was needed. Kerren had made good on her word. By noon, the news had spread across the cul-de-sac. People glanced at my house longer than usual. One neighbor, who always waved, just nodded stiffly instead. Even Rob looked uncomfortable as he stopped by the mailbox. "You all right, man?" he asked, without making eye contact. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because if I opened my mouth, then I might say something I'd regret. The smoker stayed cold that weekend. I sat in the backyard, watching the sun crawl across the grass while my tools sat untouched in the shed. My daughter asked why we weren't doing brisket. My son stayed inside and across the fence. I could hear Kerren laughing, hosting some kind of gathering. Plates clinking, soft music playing, no smoke, no flavor, just noise. At one point, her voice rose loud enough to be heard over everything. "At least we're not choking on grease and carcinogens." Laughter followed forced tight, like people laughing at a boss's bad joke. That night, I opened my old competition. Folders, photos, ribbons, notes on rubs, and timing. I hadn't competed in years. Family and work came first. But now it wasn't about trophies. It was about pride, about proving to everyone watching that my craft wasn't some backyard hobby. It was an art, and it was under attack. I found the flyer buried under coupons on the kitchen counter. The annual Smoke Showdown Regional, sponsored by a few local food trucks, and streaming live this year for the first time. I'd competed once when it was small. Now it had grown. They'd built a stage-installed audience seating, social media coverage, live chat commentary. Perfect Eyes signed up that night, under a different team name, Old Hickory Revival. The kind of name that makes judges smile and purists nod. For days I planned, tested sauces, smoked small cuts, timed and adjusted. Meanwhile, Kerren escalated. A new post on the neighborhood page showed a blurry photo of my smoker from a week ago. Captioned, "Would you eat this meat?" Comments poured in, some defending most vague. One even claimed my grilling smelled like a tire fire with a side of salmonella. Then came the flyers. Kerren printed them herself, posted them on the community board by the park. Join us for clean eating with Kerren, a tofu tasting and raw veggie brunch. Free samples, information on safe grilling. I laughed for the first time in days. She was hosting a protest in food form, but her ego was her weakness. I just needed to light the match, so I made a post. Simple, direct backyard. BBQ isn't dead. Come see for yourself. Live this Saturday at the Smoke Showdown. Brisket ribs secrets revealed, free tasting after judging. One day only I added a photo. A close-up of the brisket. Sabid Antits, Sanantunan and Saraid. Was prepping, glazed, crackling perfectly, barked. The post blew up. Shares, comments. Neighbors tagged each other. Even people from nearby streets chimed in. Then Kerren commented, "Oh, good. I'll be there to make sure you're not poisoning people again." Exactly what I wanted. By Thursday, my inbox had messages from other competitors. One recognized me from an old video. Another offered to split tent space. The food critic from the local paper messaged, asking if she could stop by. I said yes, with pleasure, Friday afternoon. I saw Kerren wheeling a cooler to her car, labeled with laminated printouts, low sodium options, cholesterol, free alternatives. I pretended not to notice, but I knew she was preparing her army. That night, I cleaned my knives, wiped down my boards, loaded the wood chips, slept maybe 2 hours. Not from nerves, from anticipation, because this wasn't about brisket anymore. This was about reclaiming something she tried to steal. My reputation, my space, my pride. And when the smoke rolled out tomorrow, it wouldn't just fill the air. It would carry a message: you don't mess with a pitmaster in his own yard. Would you like me to begin Section 3? The day of the Smoke Showdown arrived with the kind of clarity that only happens when the stakes are high. The sun hung heavy in the sky as I loaded up the truck with my gear. Coolers full of perfectly prepped meats, my tools all polished wood chips, packed like precious cargo. I took a deep breath, not because I was nervous, but because I could already taste the victory. At the park, the stage was set. Rows of grills and smokers lined the field. Tents and banners fluttered in the breeze. The smell of wood and seasoned meat filled the air. A few competitors set up quietly. Some were seasoned pros with quiet confidence. Others were newcomers who were clearly trying too hard. But I was focused on one thing. The clock time was my enemy here. Every second counted as I set up my smoker at the far end of the field. I noticed the small crowd gathering, families strolling by, festival goers trying to decide which pitmaster would be worth their time. And then I saw her, Kerren. She was already there. A massive cooler beside her, printed menus taped to the front like a fast food joint. Her face was flushed with pride. Her sign read, "Kerren's Healthy Grilling, Free Samples." I nearly choked on my coffee. She spotted me immediately, eyes narrowing, smiling that same smug smile. "Good to see you made it," she called out from across the field. Her voice carried like a bullhorn. I waved back without breaking stride. Just here to do what I do best. The first round of the competition was about to start. We each had to prepare a signature dish for the judges: brisket ribs sides. Everything had to be perfect. I set the brisket on the grill. The sizzle was immediate, and the smell, that rich, smoky scent, was already filling the air around me. The crowd began to gather. Whispers spread as people started to recognize my setup. They recognized my name from the flyers, Old Hickory Revival. This wasn't just some backyard barbecue. This was a spectacle. I glanced across the field. Kerren was already busy serving samples from her cooler. Her signature dish was a sad-looking tofu skewer with a side of wilted kale. Her followers were nodding in fake appreciation. I could hear the exaggerated mmm. From where I stood, I forced myself to look away. Not because I was intimidated, but because I couldn't afford to be distracted. The judges were circling around now. I could see them inspecting my smoker, the rub on my ribs, the bark on my brisket. I felt the familiar thrill of competition. I was in my element. But there was a part of me that knew Kerren was already circling like a vulture. The first round passed with only minor issues. I timed my ribs to perfection. The brisket was coming along beautifully. Everything was falling into place. And just when I thought I had it in the bag, Kerren made her move. She walked over to me with that smile, the one that made me want to grab the nearest spatula. "Looking good over here," she said sweetly. I nodded. "Thanks." She leaned in close. "You know you should really consider cutting your ribs this way." She pulled a plate of her sad tofu skewers from the cooler. "They'll cook more evenly." I raised an eyebrow. "Those ribs are just fine, Kerren." She waved her hand dismissively. "Right, sure, but I've been cooking for a lot longer than you." I almost laughed. "Don't you have customers to serve?" I shot back. "Oh, I'm doing fine," she said with a wink. "Maybe I'll swing by after the judging and share some tips." The words hung in the air like smoke. Heavy, unwelcome. I smiled thinly. "Maybe you can show me how to burn tofu." She didn't like that. I could see it in the twitch of her eye. She turned on her heel and walked away. But I knew she wouldn't stop there. She had to make her mark somehow, and she would try to drag me down in the process. As the competition went on, I worked with quiet intensity. There was no time for distractions. Now I basted the ribs, kept the temperature steady on the brisket, watched the sides with careful attention. But every few moments, my eyes would wander back to Kerren. She was still hovering over her customers, handing out tofu, smiling too wide, gloating. And I felt a simmering rage begin to rise in me again. She thought she was better. She thought she could tell me how to grill, how to cook, and most of all, how to be respected. The judges came around for the second round. I kept my composure, focusing on the flavors, the textures, the perfect cook. But I could hear Kerren in the distance. Her voice louder now. She was chatting with a couple of the judges, giving them tips, telling them about her special techniques. I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I didn't react. Not yet. When the judging wrapped up, the competitors gathered for the results. Everyone crowded around the stage. Kerren was standing at the front, chatter buzzing around her like flies. Then the announcer began, "And now, for the results of the first round." He paused for effect. First place in the ribs category. I held my breath. Old Hickory Revival. The crowd erupted in applause. I smiled, not just for the victory, but because Kerren's face fell. I could see it. The flicker of shock, of disbelief. Her grip on her tofu skewer tightened, but she said nothing. Instead, she just turned and walked to the back of the crowd. She was defeated, and it felt sweet. I glanced over at my setup. The meat was resting. The flavor was perfect. I had proven my point. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Kerren had just made the first mistake, and I knew the rest would be just as sweet. The final round arrived faster than I expected. The smoke was thick in the air as I made my way back to my smoker. My brisket was perfect, ribs falling off the bone, sides crisp and fresh. The atmosphere felt electric. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, but my mind was only on one thing. Kerren, I spotted her as soon as I reached my station. She was back at the cooler with her crew of customers. Her tofu skewers were still being passed around like they were gourmet. Her face was tight, her usual smug smile replaced with something darker. She must have known what was coming. As I prepped the final touches on my ribs and brisket, I couldn't help but glance her way. She was watching me. Her eyes narrowed, the kind of look a predator gives its prey just before the strike. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I wasn't about to let her ruin this. The judges approached. They made their rounds slowly, tasting each entry with exaggerated care. I watched as they tried her tofu. They smiled politely. I heard a murmur of approval. But I knew better. I could see the hesitation. The second that tofu hit their taste buds, I saw the uncertainty, the uncomfortable smiles. They were trying to be kind, but everyone knew what was happening. Her food was lacking. When it was my turn, I handed over a perfectly sliced brisket, a rack of ribs with the perfect smoke ring, sides that could have been plated in a five-star restaurant. The judges took their time. One tasted the brisket, chewed, smiled. This is perfection. Another took a rib. It's tender, flawlessly cooked. They kept moving down the line, but I could feel the tension from Kerren. Her eyes locked on every plate, her posture stiff like she was waiting for her turn to pounce. And then the moment came. The final announcement. The crowd gathered around the stage. My heart pounded in my chest. Kerren stood next to me now, a little too close, trying to squeeze into the spotlight. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a glance. The announcer stood in front of the mic. He raised a hand, and now for the results of the final round. The crowd hushed. The anticipation was suffocating. First place for brisket goes to... My grip tightened around the smoker lid. Old Hickory Revival. The crowd exploded into applause. I didn't jump up. I didn't need to. I simply took a deep breath and watched Kerren's face fall. She tried to hide it, but the disappointment in her eyes was undeniable. The announcer moved. But for the overall champion of this year's Smoke Showdown? He paused for effect. I could feel the weight of every gaze. Kerren was standing still now, frozen, her eyes wide. She knew, the rest of the competitors knew. Everyone knew I had. This first place goes to... The announcer dragged it out for just a second longer. Old Hickory Revival. The applause was deafening. I stood still for a moment, letting it sink in. Then I walked up to claim my trophy. The sound of Kerren's breath catching behind me was almost as sweet as the victory itself. I stood on the stage, my trophy in hand. The crowd was still cheering. I felt a wave of pride wash over me, but what felt even better was watching Kerren. She was standing there with that same plastic smile, trying to salvage whatever dignity she had left. But the crowd had already turned their backs on her. Her tofu skewer was still clutched tightly in her hand. But no one cared as I turned to leave the stage. I heard her voice. "That's not real barbecue." Her words hit the air like a stone. I didn't turn around, but I knew she was still standing there, her face flushed with rage, her hands shaking from frustration. I had won, and she couldn't take that from me. I walked past her, the trophy, heavy in my hands. But what felt even heavier was the satisfaction of knowing I had earned every bit of it. The crowd parted as I walked through them. Some clapped, others nodded in approval. And I couldn't help but feel like the whole neighborhood had just learned a lesson. When I got back to my station, I saw Rob. He was grinning ear to ear. "You did it, man," he said. "I told you she was no match." I nodded. You were right. The trophies were mine. The victory was mine. And when Kerren's social media posts started popping up later that night, with pictures of her sad tofu and passive-aggressive comments about the event, it didn't bother me because I knew she would never have what I had. She would never understand what it meant to truly craft something, to be a master of your art, and to earn respect. In the end, I didn't just prove her wrong. I proved something to myself, that no one could take away what I'd built. And I knew one thing for sure. Next time she tried to challenge me, she'd remember this day, and it would haunt her for a long time to come.